It's very easy to be despondent. It's very easy to think you can't change the world. We live in a world with multinational corporations that have budgets bigger than countries. We're about to go into a general election where the votes of only a few thousand people will actually decide the government that runs this country. We've got awful things happening in places like Syria and North Africa. How can we begin to try and change things for the better? I hope today I'm going to share with you stories that will prove you can. I grew up in the 1980s. At that time in South Africa, we had apartheid. We also had miners fighting in the streets with policemen. We had tanks and nuclear weapons over the Eastern European border, threatening nuclear destruction. All of those things have gone away. We have change wherever we look. The lesson that we need to learn is we can change the world by bringing ideas to life with a combination of passion, understanding, and questions. I work for the Cumbria Community Foundation, the largest grant maker in Cumbria. We give over £2 million away to a whole host of community organisations, and we've been doing that for 15 years. Every week, somebody rings up and says, I have an idea. I want to do something to make a difference. So I'll be sharing stories with you today about people who've addressed a whole range of issues: drug addiction and alcoholism, homelessness, homophobia, fear, hatred, and poverty. Now, this image is one that some of you will remember from 2001. It tells a little bit of my story and the story of the Community Foundation. In 2001, Cumbria was hit by foot and mouth disease. That pictures literally hundreds of burning carcasses. We're a rural community with an economy that depends on visitors and farming. And that disease swept across our county. People's income stopped overnight. Their hopes and dreams, their livelihoods, things that literally generations of families had put time and energy into, went up in smoke in the most horrific way. At that point in time, the Community Foundation was little more than an idea. We were operating out of an office that was little bigger than a broom cupboard with less than 2 members of staff. But we had an organisational mission. We exist to raise money and help people. And we sat there and we thought, this is awful. Can we do something? And going back to what I said at the beginning, combining ideas with passion and understanding and knowledge. Now, we were certainly very passionate about doing something about this, but we spent over a month talking to countless people. We'd never run a disaster appeal. Community foundations had never run a disaster appeal. We were tiny. If we jumped up and said, can we do something, and we let people down, well, that would be worse than doing nothing at all. But after a month of talking and researching, we just threw everything that we had at the challenge. The result was over £2 million raised, a national fundraising award, a tiny little charity going down to London to take awards away from under the noses of some of the biggest fundraising charities you've ever heard of. But more importantly, 1,300 families who not only got financial help, they knew there were people out there that cared about them, that connected people who care with causes that matter, and gave people the hope to move on. This slide is just one tiny little positive story that came out of that appalling tragedy. For those of you who don't know, this is the Great Orton Airfield. This wonderful picture is a whole host of people on all-ability bicycles, a project called Watch Tree Wheelers. Now, also on that site is Watch Tree Nature Reserve, but on that nature reserve are buried millions of animal carcasses. Fortunately, you wouldn't know, and every day of the week you will see people of all abilities coming to ride around on those bicycles and having a great time. This is a wonderful man. He's called Miles Walker. Miles rang me up 6 years ago, and he had an idea. He said, Andy, I have £200 from the government to pay my heating bills. I don't need it. He said, can you do something with it? Now in Cumbria we have 30,000 people living in fuel poverty, and in a bad winter 300 older people die because they can't heat their homes and feed themselves properly. It seemed like a loaves and fishes mission. Long story short, in those 6 years we've raised over £250,000, and more importantly, we've helped 2,000 people like this lady stay warm every winter. This woman is called Alison Taylor. She's the daughter of an alcoholic. When she left school, she did a couple of low-paid jobs in factories and then started a family. When her family started to grow up, she got a part-time job with a mental health charity. When she worked in that organisation, one of the overpowering lessons she learned when sitting down with the users of that project was that people didn't seem to be listening to people with mental health problems. So she sat and she listened, and she found out what they needed. They didn't just need medication. They didn't need 10 minutes with the GP or the consultant. They wanted a family and a life around them. And she knew from her own experience, with her father being an alcoholic, it's all well and good having a medical dependency taken away from you, but if your livelihood or the way you've lived your life means your family have disowned you and you have no job, how do you rebuild your life? Now Alison, as an absolute beginner with no training, no qualifications, no one holding her hand, found some premises which now host offices, a charity shop and flats for recovering drug addicts and alcoholics. And most importantly, it's run by those self-same recovering drug addicts and alcoholics. They've gone on to add additional housing, people have gone on to get jobs, people have gone on to get qualifications. And when I asked Alison about talking today, I said, what would you like to share? And she said, you just have to tell people you don't know. You don't know what you're doing, but you've got a passion and you've got an idea, and they'll support you, they'll back you. And she's had an absolute whirlwind learning along the way. This man was beaten up by 6 homophobic thugs. Another 8 men in his community received the same treatment. When he went for support, he found that although there was victim support and close family and friends, if you were a gay person in his community and you wanted help, then it simply wasn't available. So again, he went out, he talked to people, got together, and now he's set up a friends group that meets every week, provides emotional support, not only to gay men, but to lesbians, people who are bisexual, and people who also are transgender. It's not easy, even in 2015, being different. But if you get together and you work together, you can make real change. And I think this next slide is just indicative of change. I think it's great credit to the man in the middle with the chains, a representative of authority, and this is the transgender group with Lee. I think all of us want to be accepted for who we are, but without people like Lee stepping up and moving forward, that change simply won't happen. This is another wonderful individual. This is Pauline Charnley. Pauline lives in the Rysdale area of Barrow-in-Furness. If you live there, you're more likely to be unemployed, and if you're not unemployed, you're highly likely to live a lot less longer than the average person in this country. You'll also have high levels of crime around you. Now, Pauline, over 10 years ago, was actually sick of seeing increasing numbers of houses on her estate being boarded up and people dealing drugs on the street. Pauline didn't wage a one-woman campaign. She sat down with her friends and they started inviting people into her living room to talk about what they might like to do. A few months later, the council gave them 2 terraced houses, they knocked them together, and the Four Groves Community Centre was born. Since then, a charity shop's come in place. We all know how very hard it is To afford school uniforms if you're in a low income, well, they have a school uniform swap scheme. The food bank has both a drop-off and a collection point there. There's youth projects and this fantastic initiative, a community garden. Local people reaching out to their neighbours, giving them hope and positive things to do. I don't think those young people will ever fully be able to repay the debt they owe to Pauline and the work that she's done bringing that community alive. This isn't about a person, this is about an idea. Young boys are not very good at concentrating. They'd much rather go out, kick balls around, kick each other around and have a good time. Sometimes children grow up in families where the parents either don't have the time or they don't have the inclination to sit down and read with them. And actually reading is not very cool. Reading becomes extremely cool when you read with a professional rugby league player. And that's what this project's all about. It's Workington Rugby League players coming into schoolrooms and reading with boys. Simple, but who'd have thought it? What a great idea. Another great idea is to do with banks and money. This is not a Cumbrian idea, this is a global idea. But this is a global idea being put into action in Cumbria. This is the Workington and Egremont Credit Union, just one of several. And it's where we can save and borrow our own money, with local volunteers providing control over our own finances. This is the last case study I'm going to leave with you. This is Rachel Holliday. Rachel is only just on the start of what I'm sure will be an absolutely meteoric journey in changing the world for a better place. Now, Rachel, when she was a teenager, was homeless, drinking alcohol at huge rates. Fortunately, she went home, she got herself turned round, she got an education. But with her experience of knowing what it's like to be homeless, to know what it's like to rely on alcohol, to really get to the deepest and worst places you possibly can be, you have that knowledge and that understanding to then have an idea. Her big idea, which is nearly in fruition at the moment, is the creation of a homeless facility for people in West Cumbria, where people will be expected to work, expected to learn, and where people will also generate an income. But one of her earlier learnings is reflected in this slide. This is the Copeland homeless football team. Now, clearly, if you're homeless, you do want a roof over your head, but you also want to do the things that everybody else does. And this was the day that they took on the Carlisle homeless football team. It's the camaraderie and the support and the sense of belonging that people achieve by being involved in activities like this. So I just want to close with what I said at the beginning. This is about bringing ideas to life by combining passion and understanding and talking. None of the people I've shown you had any great mission given to them. Nobody said, go out and be great. They all come from very normal backgrounds. They all work in poor communities with limited resources. But they combined those three magic ingredients and have driven those things and taken the world forward and changed it for better, one step at a time. Thank you very much.